It's here in the Gadget Lab. Sony sent over a prototype Xperia 1 Mark V for me to take on a test drive and share some thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts. Now, this is pre-release hardware and software, but this is increasingly close to what consumers will experience when the phone properly launches and starts shipping. This phone is a monster. Sony is the last option on the market, especially in North America, for a consumer to vote with their wallet on features like headphone jacks and memory card expansion. Beyond that, Sony continues to focus on pushing bleeding edge hardware for premium price devices. This is not a casual phone to recommend. No one accidentally stumbles onto an Xperia. This is a phone built with purpose for specific demographics of consumers. There's nothing average consumer about this phone. I'm going to be producing some standalone videos comparing the 1 Mark V against the 1 Mark IV, also doing a dedicated camera tour. This video is going to be a general look, sharing my early opinions on using this phone, and I really like it. There's a certain confidence in Sony manufacturing that appeals to me. It's charmingly confrontational. Sony knows better than anyone else in the room how to make a phone. It's bold, and a Sony can never be accused of copying other brands. There's been a little attention to the design and the ergonomics of the phone, but we're sticking with the same general design and form factor that we've seen since the Xperia 1 Mark II. I like that, especially on a form factor that was already pretty bold to begin with. Money isn't being spent on reinventing the design wheel every generation. Instead, we see the internal specs continue to improve. It keeps that distinctive look while performance gets better. What's maintained is the same practical hardware approach we've always seen from this line of Xperia. Many Android manufacturers are coming back to flat sides on a phone. When you use your phone like a camera, it's nice to have a bit more surface area to hold it with. Yet the profile hasn't changed tremendously. It's almost the same thickness as a 1 Mark II, but just a tiny bit shorter. Sony's actually managed to make this phone a tiny bit smaller over 3 successive generations. The overall philosophy is the same. Keep all the buttons on one side. It works more like a camera with a dedicated shutter button, and we keep small practical bezels on the forehead and chin. I love that as a simple solution. There's no gap, there's no hole punch, there's no notch, just to include a webcam on the front of the phone. Yes, I've heard it in my comments. You can get used to a hole in your screen. You can see past a notch, but why would you want to? Since we're building in this space up here, we can use that space for proper front-facing matched stereo speakers. I gotta throw this question out there because I don't know of any. Are there any other phones left that keep that design feature? Drop me a comment down below, smash that bell icon on your way down to the comments. I think the other phones that I've used that have matched speakers are all side firing. But more than just keeping front-facing stereo speakers, Sony's tweaked these to add a little additional bass. And you'll hear that difference more clearly in my Mark IV comparison, but the Mark V sounds pretty good. Then on top of that, you can also turn up the haptic motor to add some subwoofer feel to your fingertips. It's a really fun multimedia experience, especially when you're watching cinema-wide content that fills this tall display. There's an immediate familiarity where many of these specs are already kinda maxed out in this tier of phone. The power button fingerprint sensor, still rad. The display, still the highest resolution available on any phone on the market today, and supporting that precious 120 Hz high refresh. 5,000 milliamp hour battery on tap with kinda not the fastest charging speed, but there's a significant focus on Sony phones to preserve battery longevity. Sony pioneered all the charge management and battery health features that we're seeing on other phones today. I might also have to do a charging highlight feature video too and mix in a little bit more conversation about HS power control. It's a crazy practical design. Every time I pick up a new Xiaomi with flatter sides, I appreciate that design change. And I'm grateful that Sony has stuck with it instead of riding the curved screen trend. Year over year, the only significant changes to this aesthetic, we now have a dimpled back glass, which is easier to hold on to thanks to that extra texture. Never took one lesson. So dumb. And the Mark V also gets the ribbed sides that we saw on the Xperia Pro I, again, improving that grip ability. And then I can pop in some cabled headphones, or I can swap the memory card out without having to use a pin tool, and it's just so darn refreshing. It's frustrating that other phones have lost this. The more you use an Xperia, the more it rises to those occasions where you can really flesh out how and where you want to use the phone. And this is a good time for Sony, benefiting from the TSMC fabbed Qualcomm chips. Better performance and better power management than the Samsung produced chips we got last year. On top of that, Sony is claiming to use better thermal management hardware internally, and I think that's accurate. I will be doing a more brutal camera test with a handful of other phones soon to look at this thermal performance, but in my early experiences, when you run the phone hard, it still gets warm to the touch, but it seems to be running longer out in the field than my One Mark IV could. That matters because Sony's legitimately carry features almost no other manufacturer will even try. The ability to shoot 4K at 120 frames per second is a really demanding video feature to support. It's something that most mirrorless cameras won't even attempt. The philosophy is just different here. A Sony will run at its full performance until it starts to detect that it might start impacting the footage you're shooting. I know people complain about thermal warnings, but that's a good thing. If you tell the phone you want 4K at 120 frames per second, the phone is warning you that it's getting to a point that it can't continue that frame rate. It's warning you before the footage degrades or slips, or the phone starts dropping tons of frames. If you don't care about the quality of the video, then I guess that could be annoying seeing the little pop-up. But if it matters to you that the phone is really doing what you ask it to do, then I think the Sony solution is better. I don't really care if it is 4K 60, I just want the phone to tell me that it's 4K 60. So a phone running warm to the touch in an intense video mode like 4K 120 is not a bad thing if the phone is getting heat out efficiently and can maintain that performance longer, which is exactly what we get on the Mark V. The big new exciting feature, of course, is the new main camera sensor. There were so many rumors I just could not comment on because of the embargo. Over these last 2 weeks, it's been killing me not jumping into more of these conversations. So, Sony is not jumping on the 1-inch sensor bandwagon for the Xperia 1. They are instead using the One Mark V to launch an entirely new sensor technology. The sensor surface area here is just a skosh smaller than what we might see on a phone like the Pixel 7 Pro or the Galaxy Note 23's main cameras. But Sony is boasting a significant improvement to how the sensor processes light while maintaining the high-speed readout capabilities like ridiculously fast autofocus, fast burst raw capture, and high frame rate 4K video. Sony did not make the jump to a larger sensor until they could match or beat all the capabilities of the smaller sensor in the Mark IV. We're getting better low light performance, shallower depth of field, but with all the other fixins and trimmings. Now, while we've seen these claims made from other manufacturers about light and sensor performance, this is a bit more accessible on a Sony. The differences are a bit more tangible, and there's less feeling of software or AI improving the performance. We get the optical improvements front and center. The sensor delivers in ways that the Mark IV sensor could sometimes struggle. However, Sony is adding some quality of life software to spruce up that user experience. It's still a Sony. It still handles like a camera more than a phone camera, but there's a new scene optimized night mode you can use. Now, Sony's have always had night modes, but this one is a bit more aggressive in cleaning out noise and brightening a scene. The difference in terms of phone trends, it's not a turn night into day mode like a Vivo. And the camera apps are still split between video and photo features, but now they're orientation aware, adding an on-screen shutter button for portrait orientation. It's also really nice using this camera with a larger monitor. I can even more clearly see my focus points, and that's just awesome. I'll have a lot more to say about the Xperia cameras with a few more samples soon, so stay tuned. It's going to be one of my favorites of the year, but it's a wholly different conversation than what Vivo and Xiaomi are doing in the photography space. Every time you look at one spec that doesn't seem as good, you see crazy supporting technologies that no one else is trying to do. The telephoto sensor is a little on the small side, but it has real variable zoom optics, and that means you don't need two sensors at different focal lengths. The ultra-wide output is a bit poorer in really low light situations, but all three sensors have 4K 120 frame per second video support and this ridiculous Skynet-style eye-tracking autofocus. Like here, the telephoto catches my daughter's eyes through this netting. That's insane. Instead of using AI to juice up more colors, we're using AI like Terminators to make sure we really lock on target. Lastly, wrapping up this first look, it's fun to see the improvements and optimizations focusing on gaming performance. We know Xperias are camera-focused devices and they draw a lot from the Sony Alpha team, but they're also some of the best gaming solutions around, rivaling dedicated gaming phones for the breadth of controls offered. This whole game mode got a huge shot in the arm last year and a few subtle touches this year, but it's just a monster feature for a phone like this. It maintains the same idea. If you want good performance, you can let the phone manage your apps and balance the power draw. If you're a grown-up, and you understand that max performance will drain your battery faster and run your phone warmer, the phone will let you control those aspects of the performance, and it reports things like power draw clearly for you to see, for you to make those decisions. Thanks to the new SoC from TSMC and the improved thermal pads in the phone, we get better sustained performance. Then we can fire up HS power control for better heat suppression, HS heat suppression, and get less wear and tear on the battery. Charge separation like this is showing up in a couple more phones, but it really needs to be a mainstream feature on all premium devices. If you're plugged in and doing heavier work like gaming or video rendering, why not bypass the battery, run the phone a little cooler, and not put extra charge cycles on the battery that you don't need to? You quickly see where Sony is putting their engineering and software development dollars. Sony doesn't spend a lot of time or effort on skinning the phone or trying to impress with flashy, bouncy animations. It's mostly stock Android here, but a lot of effort has gone into apps and services. Every year, that's where we see improvements, and that's why every year, it's even more disappointing to see people kinda just regurgitate the same Sony review talking points they've used in years past. You can kinda tell those folks are more impressed by the shallow surface level stuff because that's all they really seem to use on a phone. A Sony does that stuff fine, but if you're the kind of user to dig just a little bit deeper, I think a Sony really rewards that interaction. Because even for how long this video became, I mean, I wasn't really planning on this video being this long, there's still a lot more stuff to cover. It's kind of rad because Sony doesn't even call this a pro phone, and yet it occupies a space where a professional photographer or videographer could really rely on something like this to get actual work done. Even the gaming features take a step above just casual Android gaming and could benefit a more esports approach to mobile gaming. There's a seriousness to a Sony which is unique. It's something different in this space, and literally no other phone acts or works like a Sony. But that's also why I think it deserves a different kind of consideration. And in the North American market, it is the last option to really shop for something different. OnePlus and Motorola are looking to streamline features out of their phone and compete more on lower prices. Apple and Samsung are kind of stagnant with smaller and smaller iterative improvements every year. There is no other manufacturer that is continuing to add and improve features on a phone without cutting all the legacy features that people used to enjoy. Better still, we see how those legacy features contribute to using the new features on a phone. You can be one of those nerds who says a headphone jack is kind of old-fashioned and we all moved to Bluetooth, but it means we can listen to cabled headphones for our music, or we can add a microphone without having to tie up our USB-C port. Memory card support means we can spend a lot less to add a ton of storage, and we can swap that storage quickly out in the field. I could use a micro SD card with my mirrorless camera, and then I could immediately pop that directly into the phone and back up or edit that footage while never needing to open a laptop. You could miss me with Wi-Fi camera file transfers when I can go directly to that memory card. These are things we never should have given up, especially on phones making big claims about camera tech and content creation. Recently, Sony was really public about the future of photography and detailing the trends they expected between phone camera quality and standalone camera performance. Now, when new tech arrives, it's increasingly showing up on phones first. And that's a major aspect of what Sony is doing here on the Mark V. I'll of course have a lot to say about this phone, and I've got some scripts ready already for some feature highlights and camera tours, so stay tuned. We're just getting started. As always, folks, thanks so much for watching, for sharing these videos, subscribing to the channel. All of the support lately has been absolutely fantastic. If you're clicking on links, dropping comments, hitting my home site, SomeGadgetGuy.com, shopping a little merch, or if you're joining the list of names scrolling by on your screen from my Patreon. That's patreon.com/SomeGadgetGuy. These folks are the absolute coolest tech pals in the universe, and they get exclusive access to my camera deep dives. I've had a little bit more time to shoot around and dig into some of the updates on these really awesome camera phones. They're awesome, so I hope you'll check them out. Now, you know where you can find me around the rest of the internet at Some Gadget Guys across the web. I do my podcast on the Twitch. I'm spending a little bit more time on the Mastodons. I'm sharing more photo samples on the Flickrs, and a little less so these days on the Twitters and the Facebooks and the Instagrams. But I will catch you all on the next video.